Hello, what we see here are four major incidents we're probably all very familiar with. And what happened was very few people, if any, spoke up about the concerns that led up to these incidents happening. And if they did, they weren't listened to. And had they been, perhaps the incidents could have been averted or certainly their impact been reduced. So how can we manage and avoid risk if we dare not speak up or are ignored if we do? The ability to challenge, to dissent, and be contrarian is a rarity in today's world of faux harmony, cultures of fear, and fragile egos. Welcome to the lost art of contradiction, the missing piece in quality decision-making. My name is Marcus Dimbleby. It's great to be here with you on Risk Awareness Week. And thank you for Alex for the invitation to come along and present. So my background, quite a checkered past, 20 plus years in the Royal Air Force with multiple mixed tours. One of the highlights of that was serving with the US Marine Corps in Arizona, USA. Following that, I went into consultancy, working with government, large financial services and the oil and gas sector, before meeting the author of Red Teaming, Bryce Hoffman, and partnering up with him 3 years ago within Red Team Thinking. Now, within Red Team Thinking, we have quite a agnostic spread of clients, if you see here, which basically means what we do is applicable to anybody because we're focused purely on enabling people to do great things. So, session outline today, lots to fit in the next hour. We're going to look at the state of play today. We're going to look at why do we need conflict and how do we enable it? And how do we do that? Well, that's going to be through some mindset shifts, some tools and techniques I'm going to teach you. Then we'll consider next steps to how you can take this forward for impact. I just want to start with the scale of the challenge we're facing today now. This great quote. Now, it's moving too fast. It is revolution, not evolution. And there are many accelerations at once. One of the biggest problems is the difficulty of mankind to cope with it. I don't know whether political leaders or business leaders can easily handle it. And that was by Ian Conn, CEO of Centrica, which was a big British gas utilities in the UK, said over 4.5 years ago, so pre-COVID. And what he was almost forecasting here was how the change of pace in the world was really so vast, so quick, so expansive. It was too much for an individual CEO to cope with, and more often than not, too much for an individual board or executive C-suite to deal with. We have to use the wisdom of the crowd and source the knowledge from our people. And the new landscape we're facing today really is what's called VUCA, which is now our new normal. People asking, when are we going to revert back to normal? Well, we're not. VUCA is the new normal. This is a term, if you've not heard of it, came from the actual military war college in the US in the 80s. And it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Then added to that lately is hyperconnectivity, because we're seeing now that our actions are quickly relayed across the globe in seconds through social media, through the interlinks that we have globally. Incidents or events that happen on the other side of the globe are impacting us. Nothing more so proven than that in the last 12 months, where we've seen actual geopolitical events now coming into our homes and having an impact on our family lives. But also consider this. Why do businesses fail? We call this businesses dying from self-inflicted wounds, because despite this external VUCA environment going on, most businesses fail due to internal problems. Their own red tape, their own bureaucracy. This list here, and there's many more on there, are all internal. So how do we become less risk averse? How do we improve leadership? How do we make better decisions faster? Because if we don't, especially in the VUCA world, we're going to become more susceptible to failure. So that's where we're at today with the landscape of what's going on. So why do we need to have conflict? And how do we enable that? Conflict in the world today, people don't like conflict. They shy away from the word. But in business, what we're talking about here is having healthy conflict, good discourse and challenge. And we need it. If we don't, we're going to become stale and we're going to get hit by threats we don't see coming. This great quote here from John Dewey talking about conflict being the gadfly of thought. Gadflies are those horrible horseflies that fly around and rip your flesh out should they get close. And the whole purpose of that is to stir us into observation, as he says here. And really, we're looking at instigating invention, innovation. And I love this phrase, shocking us out of sheep-like passivity. So often in organizations, we see sheep-like passivity, groupthink, everybody thinking alike just to get along and not rock the boat. And therefore, what the outcome of that is normally is mediocrity, which again leads to business failure in a VUCA world. And where did this gadfly phrase come from? Well, for those who know their critical thinking history, The granddaddy of thought here himself is Socrates. And he said to the people of Athens, the Athenian gods have sent me down to save you from the state. I am that gadfly. And what he saw himself as the person to challenge the state, what they were trying to impose on the Athenian public. And for that, the state were fearful. And as always, they sought him out, hunted him down, and put him on trial for going against the state and their beliefs, and sentenced him to death. And he drank a poisoned hemlock and became a martyr because of that. But obviously, his legendary behaviors have led on to the Socratic method we see today, where basically he's talking about don't have answers, ask better questions, challenge through questioning. And that's what he did. And obviously, they didn't spare him, but hopefully what he did has allowed us today to understand and appreciate the value of critical thinking. More modern, Patrick Lencioni wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And in that, he looks at this pyramid here where he says this foundational requirement to go above that is this level of trust. And therefore, to have trust, we can therefore have healthy conflict. But with an absence of trust, there's a fear of conflict, which kind of makes sense. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Steve Jobs, we all know well, this great quote, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. Unfortunately, we don't see much of that in organizations. We hire these great people, we put them through the recruitment process, then they come in, and there's a big plethora of people leaving after 6, 12, 18 months. And when you speak to them, why? It's because they weren't enabled and empowered to do what they were brought in to do. They were told what to do. So we're missing a real trick here that Jobs clearly had mastered, because again, the sign of a great leader is when they depart an organization, it carries on being successful. And Apple has certainly done that. But leadership today and trust is broken. If you look at the Business Agility Institute reports, 3 years running, they said the biggest challenge to change and transformational management within organizations is leadership. And trust is therefore broken because of the disparity in the gap between the top level and the frontline operators. So what to do about that? Put simply, all these new ways of working in the 21st century that we've seen come in with Agile, Lean, Kanban, Scrum, they don't work. And it's not that they're poor ways of working or bad tools. It's just that we haven't brought the mindset with it. We're still using 20th century ways of thinking. So we have to evolve that thinking to enable these capabilities to be as effective as they can be. So going back to trust and healthy conflict, as I promised, we don't believe you need trust to have healthy conflict. And today I'm going to show you why and how you can go about establishing trust by having conflict, which is a kind of paradox, but I'll show you how that works. So to do that, as Einstein said here, we need a new way of thinking and we need to question everything. But the danger there of questioning everything is being seen as that critic, sticking your head above the parapet and dissenting, and therefore having your head quickly taken off with a career-limiting call. People therefore become sheep-like and passive, and mediocrity ensues. We want to stop that and help people question everything, but in the right way. And that's where we've come up with what I call the art of contradiction. So what does that look like? We want people to disagree, but to do so in an agreeable fashion. We want people to be contrarian, but in a collegiate way. We want you to be provocative, but in a professional manner. And we want you to be a critic, but constructively so. And then finally, we want disruption deliberately against your organization, against ourselves, because if we don't do it to ourselves, it will be done to us by others. And therefore, getting ahead of the game allows us to be more innovative, to be more evolutionary, and allow us to not only survive what's coming, but to thrive in those kind of environments. So they're the 5 things that we're trying to achieve and enable people to be. And then remember, play fair. Don't play nice. Don't play kind, right? Those words are just meaningless and stopping people having conflict. Be fair, appreciate, see both sides of the argument, hold your own opinions until you've heard others. And remember this, we're all on the same team. And if you don't have that understanding, and if you're not understanding the same goal you're all working to, then ask what that goal is and get clarity. Because what we've got to remember is the enemy is on the outside. So much infighting in organizations causing them to fail, when if they work together, we're seeing far more effective outcomes and focusing on the threat that actually exists external to the company. So that's why we need conflict and how to enable it. Now we're going to look at the physical tools, techniques, and the mindset you need to actually be able to do it. So what are they? All comes under the banner of what we call red team thinking, this critical thinking capability. And then the tools and techniques, the tools we're going to look at think, write, share. We're going to look at Premortem, then a couple of techniques called go on, be a devil, and never assume, which we all have heard of and never should do. But believe me, we all do. So what is red team thinking? It's a cognitive capability. That's really important to understand up front. Talking about how we have to shift our thinking from the last century. We therefore need to retrain our brains. And it's a paradigm shift in how we think from a cognitive perspective. It allows us to engage critical thinking. Now, if I ask you all who's a critical thinker, you probably all put your hands up, but we're not by default. Our brain is lazy and takes shortcuts. We do what's called System 1 from Daniel Kahneman's investigations into the human mind. It was how our default brain operates 95% of the time. It's rapid, it's quick, it's intuitive, but it's error prone. What we need is System 2, which is slower, more thoughtful and logical, and more likely to make the right decisions. That's called System 2, and that's what critical thinking physically is, engaging the brain to do. We then need to expose the threats and also identify opportunities. The beauty of red teaming is it's a double-sided capability. It not only looks for the bad stuff that's inbound, but it also highlights those opportunities that the real organizations that succeed are the ones that capture and maximize those opportunities as well as avoiding those threats. We need to enable distributed decision-making. What do I mean by this? The military called it mission command. How does the general pass down his intent and guidance all the way to the lowest individual on the battlefield without being there himself, or Ausschlags tactic, as the Prussians called it? So how do you in your organization pass down decision-making and control to where the information is actually at? And if you can do that well, you can do that with confidence and trust, then decisions can be made quicker and faster without going through the hierarchical power gap that we often see. Then finally, we need to encourage diversity of thought. All organizations have these ridiculous diversity agendas and plans that they're going for, ticking quotas, 20% of this, 15% of that. And that's great. But if you don't then do the I piece of D&I, the inclusion, then you're not bringing what you're trying to achieve. What organizations need is diversity of thought. That's it. You get that through having a diverse workforce. But if you're not enabling them to engage and speak up and be included, then it's all for naught. And as one of our clients said, diversity without inclusion is a delusion. And he's not wrong. So that's what red team thinking is, the 4 E's, if you want to remember those. And then really importantly, this is a mindset shift. It's a cognitive capability. And you have to understand how red team thinking works and understand the application of the brain to this, because your brain will go against you while you're doing this, because it's going to take some different and dark places and different types of thinking, which your brain will default push back against. And therefore, to stop that happening, there's a set of tools and techniques. And if you apply them, what's it going to allow you to do? Navigate that complexity that I was talking about in the VUCA world. It's going to allow you to think more strategically, not just the executive level, but everybody throughout the whole organization has a more strategic perspective on what's going on and the impacts of their actions. It's going to allow you to develop new ideas and perspectives because we're sourcing the wisdom of the crowd and getting other people to speak up and provide their innovative input. It's going to allow you to be more adaptive and resilient. Business agility, we've heard a lot of talk about. How do you actually enable that? We have to adapt to what's happening in that world outside. And when we do get a punch in the face and go down, we have to be able to get back up and be resilient and continue operating. That's what sets the companies apart who are surviving and thriving today. And then ultimately, as we talked about right at the front, this is going to allow you to make higher decision quality, better decisions faster in today's complex world. And ultimately, it's down to you. You've got a choice. Today, you have to do something. If you want to take the blue pill and remain in ignorance, and ignorance is not bliss, then things probably won't work out too great in the long run and your company will go down. You will not, by standing still, continue to survive. You have to take the red pill. You have to expose those skeletons in the closet. You have to confront the lies we tell ourselves, and you have to dive down the rabbit hole and see what's down below that's causing the problems and take and tackle those things head on. To do that, we've come up with what we call the 3 C's. Real simple, but highly impactful and powerful if you get them right. Now, the first C is about clarity. First off, talked about that goal earlier. Do you have clarity of your company's vision, mission, purpose, the strategy it's trying to achieve? And then as an individual, Do you have clarity on what it is you're supposed to be doing? What are the problems you're facing into? Do you have self-awareness? Do you understand how you operate yourself? What biases are impacting on how you think and operate? Do you have awareness of others? Very important to understand your team members and the diverse mix-up and makeup of that team. How are you best enabling them to bring their capabilities to the forefront? And do you have situational awareness? What is actually going on today, tomorrow, downrange, and around you from a holistic perspective? Not many organizations can tell me yes when I ask them, do you have clarity to that level and depth? Then you need the capability to affect and impact on that clarity you're searching. Do you have both technical competence, which is often the main focus of our hiring and recruitment and training, but do you have the cognitive capability? Which is really what we're talking about today. Do you have that mindset, that understanding of how you engage critical thinking to exercise on that clarity that you have to achieve the outcomes you're looking to get to and the outcomes you're trying to push towards downrange and the processes along the steps to get there? Get those two things right, and then you get the culture that the organization needs. So often we go into organizations and find there's a very toxic culture where people are fearful of speaking up. There's a very hierarchical command and control mechanisms in place. But if you have clarity and capability, then that higher level organization that Ian Conn talked about has the confidence and trust to push down the decision making, to push down control. So command and control, while it's fixed at the top, becomes flexible, and you retain command and you push down control through the organization. That way you get a culture that is innovative. It's continually focused on learning and evolution of that Kaizen Toyota method of continuous improvement. And you get the virtuous spiral going upwards rather than the vicious cycle taking you downwards. Do you do this in your organization? Daniel Kahneman, I've mentioned already. Great quote from one of his recent podcasts is, you need to protect your dissenters. Now, these aren't the people who are the cynics or the naysayers of your organization, the blockers. These are the people who are the most passionate. They see the problems, they have ideas, they want to be heard, and they are in love with the company they work for, which is why they're speaking up or speaking out, or why they often leave because they can't stand to see a good organization go down. And if you call those people out and isolate them or give them career limiting options, then what's going to happen? You're going to create sheep-like passivity. You're going to see other people behaving in the same way and not speaking up, and therefore what you're doing is suppressing innovation and engagement. And one of the biggest problems in organizations today is engagement. Around 80% of people come to work disengaged. And both Apple and Google done a study and survey report to prove that for every 1% increase in engagement brings a 1% increase in ROI. So if you've got 80% of your people disengaged, there's a lot of scope there for getting some real high quality ROI back on engaging your people. And it's not hard to do. And today we'll look at how you do that. And if you do that, here's what happens. Everyone gets heard. And we did this last year with a great group of people in a NATO headquarters, a real diverse mix from the senior gnarly old warfighting colonels down through all the ranks to what was a real nice treat, if you will, to see was a lovely young lady from the local university who'd come in to do a 6-month internship. And she brought some fantastic insights. And of the 10 recommendations they made that week, 5 of them had come from her and another young lady in the audience. And at the end of the week, the admiral came in and got back briefed. And the colonel, give him his credit, said, "Sir, I have to let you know that 5 of these great suggestions came from these 2 ladies in the room." And the admiral turned around and said, "Please stand up and let me know how and why you did this." And the young lady talked about here stood up and said, "If it wasn't for these tools, I would not have spoken up all week." What was nice was when she did start to speak up using the tools, people saw that she had a lot to offer. Whereas initially, first perceptions would have been to dismiss her, but they didn't. They heard what she said and then realized how effective what her knowledge and experience was to bring her into the fold, if you will, and have trust that she could bring something of value to the audience and what we're trying to get as an outcome. It also ensures that everybody's thinking. You're challenging your people to think. And this great CEO of media brands in me here, Christian Johansson, challenged his people to challenge him. He said, "I don't have all the answers anymore. This VUCA world, things are moving too quick. I need you all to challenge me, to challenge my board, to challenge the strategies we're coming up with to make sure they're effective." And this great quote, he said, "This isn't just a power tool for making better decisions faster. It allows us to shift our culture in the right direction." Think about that. How hard is it to shift culture? If you've got a tool set, a set of techniques, a mindset that you can now enable your people to actually move the culture in the way they want it to move as well as you, then you're onto a real good thing using this capability. So how do you do it? How do we enable healthy conflict? Well, to do that, you build trust. It's the opposite of what Lencioni said. By enabling conflict, by enabling people to have healthy challenge with each other, doing that actually builds trust. And we've seen this with our clients and people we work with. As we do this, and we do a lot of this anonymously, very quickly, you don't need anonymity. People are quite happy to then speak up. People are quite happy to call for other people to provide input because they now see the value that others bring to the party. So by having conflict, the paradox is it actually builds trust. As I said here, it's like a Swiss Army knife, or as someone else said, it's like an 80s martini. Anytime, any place, anywhere, anyone, and any problem. So you can use these tools and techniques. And this is why the red teaming versus red team thinking is a very different concept. You don't need a red team. You need everybody thinking like a red teamer. And therefore you can apply these very simple tools and techniques at any time to any problem you're facing, be it a quick phone call or email, or to a major strategic plan that you're looking into at a multi-million-dollar level of understanding. So let's jump into some of these tools then. First one is think, write, share. So at this point where we're looking at the problem. So what is the problem? We have a lack of innovation and ideas. Why is that? We're getting the same old stale thinking from the same people speaking up all the time, the same ideas, same people dominating the conversations, and therefore we get stale outcomes. Why is that? Because there's fear. Other people with the good ideas don't speak up because there's a lack of, what's the term? Psychological safety. Coined by Professor Amy Edmondson. Great book by her is The Fearless Organization, which talks about this. And therefore, a lack of that and a lack of trust stops people speaking up. You can create psychological safety instantly with the tools we're about to show you. People get singled out because more often than not, there's no anonymity. So if I'm going to stand up and speak up, I'm singling myself out. I'm putting my head above the parapet. And most people aren't willing to do that. Therefore, by providing anonymity, you give people the opportunity to speak up without putting a face to what they're saying initially. And biases. Let's not deny this fact. If you're not aware, everybody, you, me, all of us are affected by biases, and it changes constantly. It's a human nature. When we see something, when we hear something, when we believe something, our biased and experienced opinions and our heuristics will affect how we think. So if we see other people doing or saying something, our brain will be biased towards that and will be led by that. So how do we overcome that? The solution to that is think, write, share. Very simple. At this point, I call it facepalm coaching. This is so common sense, it's ridiculous. But as we all know, common sense isn't that common. But use this tool in practically all the things you do and you'll get great outcomes. So first thing, as I said, it's common sense. Think about the question. But how often do we do this? As humans, if I'm starting to write an answer on a question on a board, you're already trying to answer it in your brain before I've even finished. If I ask a question in a group, somebody will, we call it the springboard, will jump up and shout out what they think the answer is. Immediately when they do that, they are influencing everyone else in that room with their answer. If I, as the boss, walk in and ask a question, but then start to lead it with what I think the answer is, straight away, I have persuaded everybody to sway their brain and thinking into what I want as I perceive the outcome should be. So what we do is we say, right, here's the question. Do not speak. Take a moment of mindfulness. Here's the question. Now think for 60 seconds. Put the actual clock on. Force people to think. And what you're doing now is stopping that system one rapid engagement of the brain, and you're engaging critical thinking into system two. And often what you initially think the answer is, after 60 seconds of deep thought, you're actually finding out that 80% of the time, the answer you initially thought of will have changed to something different. So think about the question. The next stage, again, super simple, write it down. What's happening now when we write it down? Dr. Gary Klein, another great psychologist and a great frenemy, if you will, of Daniel Kahneman, has done great examinations of people's brains. When they write something down, you open a different part of your brain, and therefore you're further consolidating your answer. You're making it more concise. You're also committing to it by writing it down. And by writing it down, what you're now allowing yourself to do is listen. Because remember in class at school when the teacher said, right, I'm going to ask a question. And she asks Bob. And Bob gets it wrong. You're thinking she's going to ask me next. And therefore, you're not listening to Bob. You're ready to prepare your answer and your thought process and focusing purely on you. If you've written it down, that's not important. You can just pick it up and read your answer. So what you're now doing is allowing everybody to actively listen, active listening. Remember, my grandma used to teach me this. It's like, are you listening to me? I'm listening. She goes, no, you heard me, but you're not listening. We have to listen to people because by listening to each other, that's how we get engagement. That's how we get understanding. And that's how we innovate. So write down your answer. Then we share it with a group. How do we do this? Lots of different ways of doing this. There's lots of online digital tools to allow you to do this anonymously. In the office, in the rooms, in the breakout areas, what we do here is we'll give everybody the same piece of card or post-it notice and pen, and then get them to write it down and then collect them all in, put them all up on the board and talk to them so nobody knows who's written what. You can spread them and share them around again and shuffle them so nobody knows who's reading what. Now what you're going to do is get a room of 10 people. You're going to get 10 responses. There might be a couple of similar ones, but you're now going to get everybody engaging, everybody providing their input and their thoughts. And you may get the perfect answer straight away. You may get what we call the hybrid opportunity where you can take the best bits of all of them and create the best solution from everybody. And even if you don't pick mine, I'm quite happy because A, I've been listened to. I've had the opportunity to contribute. And then in the discussion, I've seen that, yeah, my idea, while it was okay, there's a far better one. And I'm now going with Susan's submission and the blend of that with Steve and Dave's, because that is the best for the outcome we're trying to achieve. It's not all about what I think is the right answer. Whereas if I was the alpha in the room at the beginning, the minute you asked that question, I jumped up with my answer and everybody else then went quiet. That introvert who's got the golden nugget of information sat quietly and didn't speak up. And we all go with my alpha answer. That's not the best outcome. And we find that downrange when things start to go wrong. So think, write, share. Super simple, immensely powerful. And this is a tool we use as a sort of foundational tool in all of our prime tools within the toolkit itself. So let's do this for real, shall we? What prevents the best ideas surfacing in your organization? So again, take a minute to think on that. What prevents the best ideas surfacing in your organization? One answer. What prevents the best ideas surfacing in your organization? And then I'd like you to share that. All anonymous. Go to www.menti.com. Enter code 3332 6536. Or if you have your mobile, you can scan the QR code. It'll take you straight there and just type in your word. And it'll start to come up as a word cloud. You can't see it. You can't see anybody else's. No one else will know who's written what. But it's a great way. And again, menti.com, use this as a tool yourselves. It's free to sign up to, super powerful. And if you want to upgrade, it doesn't cost much for your broader organization. So menti.com 3332 6536. This is not live. I shall share these afterwards through the portal. But in good old tradition, here's one I prepared earlier. So this is a mix of previous ones we've conducted. And you can now start to see probably a lot of which came up today from yourselves. Politics, fear, too much competition, lack of support, lack of a platform to do this, no process, resistance, dominant leaders, a lack of understanding, lack of psychological safety, ego, bad leadership, groupthink. Yeah, but politics. So looking through this here, we're seeing fear, politics, poor leadership, lack of process, lack of safety. And again, I can tell you now, we've done hundreds of these, and I would say 80% of the content is identical, irrelevant of the organizations. And you saw the organizations we work with. So if I do this with a group of firefighters, a group of bankers, a group of military officers, a bunch of nurses, a bunch of frontline supermarket floor stackers, we get the same 80% responses because this is all about humans. As I said at the beginning, it's about people, which is why this capability is so powerful. So that's think, write, share. The most powerful tool and most simple tool you can have. Use it going forward, use it tomorrow, share it with your teams. You will not be disappointed. The next one we're going to look at is the Premortem. Now, you may have heard Premortem, but what's this trying to achieve? We're trying to look at failure. And this failure word is sort of come around again as a fallout of Agile. We're here to fail fast and break stuff, learn quick. And we all talk about this, creating environments for safe to fail experiments. And it's used again as a buzzword, but we don't actually want it to happen. And when people do fail, they're not allowed to learn from it. They're persecuted and prosecuted and witch hunted for why did you fail? And that's not really useful. So why did this come up? Optimism bias, the engine of capitalism, Daniel Kahneman calls this, which is great because we need optimism, but often we are overly optimistic in our own abilities to deliver and the plans we create. That's called planning fallacy. All right. So if we're overly optimistic, then we don't plan or consider failure, which is dangerous. As I've said already, we talk about failure and that it's okay, but really, is it? It's not, is it? Nobody likes failure. Nobody wants to fail. And if you don't create an environment where it's okay to fail in the right way, then again, failure will be catastrophic and therefore impactful. We get blindsided. Things occur and they derail our plans, often catastrophically, because we haven't planned for that to happen. So when it does happen, it's a big shock and nobody saw it coming. The black swans, if you will, the unknown unknowns that come out of nowhere and catch us. But in hindsight, we all saw that coming, but nobody spoke up. Goes back to the original 4 pictures I showed you. Then we have a fixed mindset. What we're trying to focus on here is enabling what we call iterative decision making. We have to be flexible and accept that a decision we make today may be a good decision, but it may be wrong tomorrow. That doesn't mean it was wrong today. It means that the environment's changed, the situation's changed, and therefore we have to be able to iterate. And if we create plans with optionality, when that decision has changed and the environment's changed, we don't have to wait and go into paralysis analysis while we wait for that decision to be changed and the orders to come back down again. We can flip to the other plan that we've created within the options. And that's how you push that control down, by having plans with optionality. So those at the frontline operators see things changing, they don't pause or they don't carry on with the original plan that takes them further towards the cliff edge. They are able to pivot instantly, and therefore time continues to move forward at the pace you wish it to, rather than accelerating and causing bigger problems. So how's this different to risk management? Premortem versus risk management. I love this. When we're talking to risk managers, I say, talk to me about failure. And they go, well, we just asked what could go wrong. I say, okay, and what's your usual answers when you speak to your project managers and your plan creators? What could go wrong with this plan? 9 out of 10 times, well, nothing. We've thought of everything. We've covered this, we've covered that, and this plan's solid. Planning fallacy, optimism bias. However, the creator of Premortem, Dr. Gary Klein, back in 1991. So again, a great tool that stood over 30 years the test of time and has evolved continually throughout. He says, don't ask what could go wrong. Your brain doesn't function well when you put that question to it. It's easily to skirt the actual answer. Force your brain to go to disaster mode. This was an unmitigated disaster. How did that happen? And I'm talking headline news. Put up a picture like this. How the hell did this situation arise? How are we now stood amongst the flames? How are we neck deep? What happened for this to occur? And by doing that, your brain goes to a very, very different place and comes up with a very different level of thought, which is what you're trying to stimulate. So if you haven't heard of Premortem, I'm sure you've heard of Postmortem, after death. Only watch a few TV cop shows to know about what a postmortem is. So how does that work? Well, we execute the plan. We've created a strategy, we've written the plan, then we dish it out to whoever to execute the plan. Funny old thing, 9 out of 10 times, something goes wrong. Failure occurs. What do we do then? We look at the wreckage, we look at the problems, the aftermath to figure out what went wrong. This is where we start to get blame, we start to get our own biases kicking in and misunderstanding of what actually went wrong and why it went wrong. If we do work it out and we understand that, determine the cause of failure, we then share those lessons. What we're trying to do here is prevent it happening again, lessons identified, lessons learned, and therefore we learn from others' mistakes, which is always the best way, and our own mistakes, so we don't do it again. And Gary Klein was doing this with a client back in the early 1990s. He was like, this is just stupid. Why are we doing this? Why not fail first? Let's create failure And from that, we learn, then we execute. And in doing so, we've learned the lessons before it actually happens. And we can do that certainly to a very high level and understanding of what's going to happen. So how does a pre-mortem work? We imagine that failure occurs. And I don't mean something's gone wrong. Catastrophic, disaster, headline newsworthy failure. Really trigger that brain into that deep, dark depths of, wow, this has been spectacular. What does that look like? Stand with your back to the flames. Feel it. Really imagine this is on the frontline news tomorrow. The pit of your stomach now feels sick. You're worried. You're starting to sweat. How could this possibly happen? Now, look at the steps that led to that failure occurring. And it's often easy to work backwards. So literally stand with your back to the flames. And what happened? What was the last thing that happened before this went off? Then the step to that, then the step to that, that leads you now to present day. And what are those dominoes looking like that are going to topple forward and lead us there? And if we know that, we can now figure out how to avoid, to block, or to mitigate should they start to approach us and have us aware of these things potentially on the horizon downrange. Then we execute the plan. So the execution has moved from the beginning to the end. And when we do this, we talk about, doing this with big planners, big strategists before we execute. And they go, no, Marcus, we don't want to do this. It sets off a negative tone. People are stepping out already concerned about failure. And I say, okay. And it's quite painful to do a pre-mortem, isn't it? Yes. People don't like it. Okay, how painful is it to do a post-mortem? And what actually happens is the opposite. When you do this, people are stepping out more confident because they have awareness. They are clear on what lies ahead and the potential pitfalls. And also in their back pockets, they've got those plans of optionality because they've either already mitigated those problems and modified the plan, or should something occur, they know that plan A becomes plan B, becomes plan C, and they've got that pivot option. And therefore confidence actually rises. And we literally have seen, from a 20% likelihood of success to an 80% and beyond. If you allow them to use the other tools and techniques as they're moving forward, as they operate, you're going to get a much more higher success rate. So that is the pre-mortem. So how can you do this? Again, takeaway, super simple. Go back with your teams tomorrow, whatever it is you're doing, ask them to contemplate failure. Imagine that something has spectacularly gone wrong. They'll enjoy this. It's fun. Then work backwards. Ask yourself, how did this failure occur? And again, you'll get a plethora of great ideas and solutions and things you would never thought of. Things that are clearly there in front of you, but you could not see. And that's okay. Someone else will see it. And then ask, what can we do to avoid that? Now you're going to get recommendations. You're going to get engagement. You're going to get people feeling they've contributed, and you're going to get a better, more robust plan. That's pre-mortem. Next technique, go on, be a devil. Problem and the challenge we face here. Solutionizing. We often create solutions without truly understanding the problem. We do this all the time. Somebody read something or somebody saw a competitor doing X, and therefore we have to do X as well. And therefore one of our great set of tools is called the 6 strategic questions. And the first question is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And if you can't answer that, then why are you doing what you're doing? Satisficing. What's satisficing? It's going for the quickest first solution that we find that's good enough. And sometimes we have to do that. It's not a bad thing. When we're under pressure to get things done quickly, the quickest solution is often good enough. But often, if you just took a little bit longer, another 10 more minutes of challenging and thinking of questioning, you might get a far better solution. And challenge. We rarely welcome challenge, don't we? Especially if it's your plan. Don't you dare call my baby ugly. I've seen that so many times. It goes back to the optimism bias and the planning fallacy. So how do you challenge somebody who's clearly got a plan that's going to fail or isn't going to be creating the outcomes you want? You need these tools and techniques. Collective wisdom. How often do we engage our people to get everybody's input, to get those blind spots that we have uncovered, and to get people feeling like they're being engaged? We don't. And therefore, you don't get the innovation and the broader output that you're capable of doing. So what's the option here? Probably all heard of this, the devil's advocate. We've all heard that person in the room or that executive, you come up with a great idea and they go, that's really good. Just let me play devil's advocate for a moment. And that normally means, let me be an asshole, but I'm going to do it in a professional way so you can't call me out for it. They're going to slaughter your plan, give you all the feedback that really isn't helpful. So the devil's advocate, while it was sort of proposed as a great business opportunity from the business schools back in the 80s and 90s, it's pretty much fallen foul. So where did it come from? This chap on the right here is the coolest named pope in history, Pope Sixtus V. He was the pope at the Vatican back in 1587. And he had a problem. He had a lot of do-gooders, if you will, coming to claim sainthood, to be canonized. And obviously, if you got sainthood, you were paid a decent amount of money. And he was looking out the square, seeing them queuing around the square, going, there's a real problem with this. We can't afford to pay these people. And do you know what? I don't believe them. So he stood up the office of the Advocatus Diaboli, the office of the devil's advocate. And it's the first really office in history that's been built to physically challenge. And they create a nice survey for people to fill out to prove their worldly good deeds. And obviously, after a year, there was a 95% drop-off. So while devil's advocate is good, and its definition here is, reasoned arguments against a position that you believe in, it often falls foul. And here's why. Because if you dissect it, here's what happened. And if you watch the movie here, The Devil's Advocate, with these two fine gentlemen, you'll see a lot of this. It's a paradigm, not a process, right? It's a good idea, but it's so often contrary to what we're trying to achieve. So you can very easily get this wrong. How do we get this wrong? I can quite easily dismiss you if you're the devil's advocate, because that's the role you're playing. Therefore, your role is to challenge everything for the sake of challenge, not to challenge things because you feel there's a valid reason to challenge. So if that's what you do all the time, you just, as remember that crying wolf, therefore easily to dismiss that. Very career limiting. If this is all you do, you're going to upset a few people. You're going to rock a few apple carts and upset the status quo. Therefore, I really warn you not to take on board anybody who offers you to be the devil's advocate. It doesn't work. And it doesn't really help you analyze the problem itself. It doesn't give you a solution. All it does is critique, almost cynic, if you will. So it doesn't bring the value that it could. And therefore, we steer away from that. If you listen to this here, the problem with most people is that they don't believe something can happen till it already has. It's not stupidity or weakness. It's just human nature. This is called normalcy bias. This is a great quote from the 10th Man, if you've heard of that concept, in the zombie movie World War Z. It's a thinking man zombie movie. Highly recommend watching it. So just let me share now this next clip for you to give you an insight about what the 10th man is.
In the 30s, Jews refused to believe they could be sent to concentration camps. In 72, we refused to fathom we'd be massacred in the Olympics. In the month before October 1973, we saw Arab troop movements, and we unanimously agreed they didn't pose a threat. Well, a month later, the Arab attack almost drove us into the sea. So we decided to make a change.
Change?
The 10th man. If 9 of us look at the same information and arrive at the exact same conclusion, it's the duty of the 10th man to disagree. No matter how improbable it may seem, the 10th man has to start digging with the assumption that the other 9 are wrong.
And you were the 10th man?
Precisely.
Fantastic. So that's the 10th man concept. And while that is a Hollywood construct, what that actually led to was the formation of the Israeli Defense Intelligence Red Team Devil's Advocate. And that's a small group of individuals who were created to challenge and create discourse and good conversation. Because again, as you saw in that clip there, when everybody's thinking the same, it's often that our brain is leaping to that system one conclusion, and somebody needs to just go, hang on a minute. If we're all going down that avenue, maybe there's a trick. Maybe something different here is happening. We just need to stop and check ourselves and consider the alternatives, consider the other options. And by doing that, you get a far better outcome. That's the concept of the 10th man. And that's what, again, the Israeli defense stood up. They had this group, and it's called Ipcha Mistabra, which actually means, on the contrary, the opposite may be true in Aramaic. And we have the former commander, Israeli colonel from that staff, now working on our team. And he tells a great story about the Yom Kippur War and how the events of that war, as you just saw in the video there, physically, mentally changed the whole way of thinking for the Israeli nation. and how they could never allow that to happen again, and hence the creation of their devil's advocacy red team.
In the 30s,
and a great quote here from Thomas Schelling, another Nobel Prize winner. One thing a person cannot do, no matter how rigorous his analysis or heroic his imagination, is to draw up a list of things that will never occur to him. And this is where we go to the wisdom of thought. Now, there are certain things out there that you will never, ever think of in a month of Sundays, but the person next to you asks the same question will come up with a very different answer. There's a great Chinese proverb that says, none of us is as smart as all of us. And we all know the saying, 2 heads are better than 1, 3 heads are better than 2, and keep going. The more people you can get bringing in their own insights and perspectives and experience, hence diversity of thought, the better outcomes you're going to get. And how you enable that is using these tools and techniques. So what's the solution then? If you want to go on and be a devil without sticking your head above the parapet, let everyone play the devil's advocate. You don't even have to call it devil's advocate, but just ask for everybody's opinion. Challenge them to think, okay, what's the opposite of this? What else could be true that we're looking at here? What else might be a different alternative? Get all those different inputs. Force yourself to come up with viable, different alternatives. Don't solutionize and jump on that bandwagon of this is the answer. We must go down path A. What are the other viable alternatives that might work? Because then in doing so, like everything, you're going to start to see different perspectives that we talked about in Think, Write, Share. And then you can start to cherry pick. And while there's then not one course of action, you're taking multiple inputs to create the best course of action from all of those engaged inputs that you've now got. Far better way of doing this. Okay, that was go on, be a devil. Finally, let's have a look at never assume. And we all know why we should never assume. I'll be polite and not say why. So what are the problems? Assumptions are a big problem. Why? Because as the saying goes here, they are the mother of all mistakes, because there are many assumptions made. And going back to those 4 photographs at the beginning, there were many assumptions made in the path that led up to those incidents occurring. Why? Because a lot of the assumptions that we do make aren't actual assumptions. They are wishful thinking. We'll talk about what assumptions are in a second. They are merely wishful thinking because we want it to happen. That's, again, our brain wanting things to be so, but it doesn't make it so. We've got to counter against that. Invisible assumptions are most dangerous when they are unstated. How often do we need to read between the lines when somebody says something? The boss said X, but he actually was meaning Y. Did we pick up on that? Did we understand that? Has someone gone off and acted upon that without actually challenging and being clear about what that meant? Going back to clarity. Are we clear on what the problem is we're facing into or what we've been asked to do? Then they are ignored. Assumptions are created and then often ignored. But if we are aware of them, we need to validate them and then track them to make sure that they are understood and not going to derail us and become wishful thinking rather than the facts we need them to evolve into. So I said we'd talk about assumptions. What are they? Facts versus assumptions. Now, a fact is a fact is a fact. It's a thing that's objectively true right now. And despite what you read on Twitter and the social media, it's not a matter of opinion. It's not open for debate, right? Or it's things we believe will be true in the future. No, that's not true either. That's not a fact as is right now. Whereas an assumption are things that may be true, but we can't prove them to be true at this time. And ideally, assumption is a fact that is not yet true, but will become so in the future. And that's what we're trying to do. I'm making an assumption on the premise that that will become a fact downrange. It may be truth now, but I can't validate that, so I have to wait. But I have to be aware of that assumption becoming true, because if it doesn't become true, that's where the problems occur. And as Tim Ferriss says here, the best results in life are often held back by false constructs and untested assumptions. So if you have an assumption, and that's what these tools are about, is to validate that, surface that assumption, validate it, and then either fix it or put mechanisms in place to monitor it until it becomes true so it doesn't catch you unawares. So what's the solution to this? Never assume. Engage your people. What we're talking about throughout all of this. Ask them to make a list of the stated and unstated assumptions that underlie the plan, strategy, or whatever it is you're doing. And use Think, Write, Share. As I said, we use this tool in everything we do. Use think, write, share, teach them that, then ask them to provide you a list with all the assumptions. Just as an example, we've got a one-page document. You'll normally get 25 to 40 assumptions, both stated and unstated, explicit, implicit, within a one-page document. We've done 300-page strategies where we've had 450 plus assumptions, and you have to assess them all because one of those that's wishful thinking will cause it all to fail. Then ask them a simple question. How certain are you that they will become truths, facts? Gut check, yes or no. And those that the most impactful, the most highly unlikely to become true, we need to do some work on. Okay, what can we do to help make sure they do prove true? What actions can we take? What mitigations can we put in place? What can we do now? What can we do downrange? Plans with optionality. And then develop options in case they don't. Backup plans, pivot options. Engage your people to do that, and you'll get a great list of quality outcomes. You'll identify those pitfalls that are your assumptions, and you'll have mechanisms in place to either make them truths now or mitigating options downrange if they don't become so, how you can divert disaster. Never assume. So we've covered the state of play today, what's going on out there. We've looked at why we need conflict and how we can enable it. And then we've gone through some simple mindset shifts, tools, and techniques. So what are the next steps? You've got the option that we talked about. Hopefully by now you've realized there is no option. You've made the right choice and you've got to take that red pill. We've got to face into these challenges. We've got to take the skeletons out of the closet. We've got to stop lying to ourselves and face into those ugly truths. So where do we go from here? It's really interesting that when the former Special Forces commander who brought red teaming back into the military, what he was looking to do was enable a cadre of people in the middle to take this training and then go back to their organizations and infect, if you will, permeate this capability across their peers, down through their subordinates and up into their commanders. And what he wanted to do was create an intellectual insurgency. So now you've got some of these basic tools. Welcome to the insurgency. This is now on you to go back to your organizations, to use these yourselves, to share it with others, and to enable the engagement from your great people. So how do you do that? Just start doing it. Go and use think, write, share. Go and ask people about the assumptions. Go and ask them to plan for failure. A, they'll enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. B, you'll get absolute diamonds coming out in ways of thought and suggestions and solutions. And you'll get a massive increase in your engagement, morale, and mindset shift. Get your teams to do likewise. Don't think it has to be you there leading this. Teach them these tools and encourage them to go and use them when they're writing emails, when they're in meetings, when they're engaging in other sessions with other different parts of the business. Get them to use these thought processes, these tools and techniques to allow them to make better decisions. And here's the key. Never remain silent when something needs to be said. You've now got the tools and techniques. Even if you want to raise a thing without getting your head shot off, you now can do. Use them effectively and encourage others to do so likewise, and demand it of people to challenge you if you're in a position where you can do that. So change your behaviors today. We can't change culture. We can't change mindset. Those take time. You change behaviors instantly. Behaviors change mindset. Mindset changes culture, and you get that virtuous circle. So any engagements you have, any meetings or discussions you have, make them more effective by doing these simple things. Great rule. Our cardinal rule of red teaming. Everybody speaks once before anybody speaks twice. So if you've got a room of 10 people and you speak first, you do not speak again until everyone else in that room has had an input. And that can be anonymously written down, or you can speak up. But everybody speaks before the next person speaks again. Seniors speak last. Let the juniors speak up first. Because again, if you speak up first as a senior, what you say will dominate the conversation and sway people's biases. Use think, write, share. I can't labor that point enough. Super simple. Take it away. Teach others to use it. Use it all the time. Really, really powerful. And then use anonymous voting. When you get your inputs, again, ask people to vote. If you've got 6 inputs, what we do is half it plus 1. So half is 3 plus 1, 4. Give people 4 votes. They can weight their voting. If you've got a team of 10, you're going to get 40 votes spread across 6 different things. You'll start to see what's causing most people problems, what's causing most people impact in their work. And therefore you can gain the wisdom of the crowd to go forward. And use the most applicable tool or a technique or a mix of We often do Premortem, and at a certain step, we'll jump across to an assumption because an assumption will crop up. We'll validate that assumption, and we'll go back to it. And then we'll look at the devil's perspective of how we get a different version here. Use these tools like a Swiss Army knife. Pick and choose them. Don't feel that you have to use them all, but choose them as a requirement to the specific problem you're facing, and don't be fearful or scared about jumping around between them to get the right outcome. And again, involving others to do the same. So that's what we're trying to hopefully let you go away with today. So you can do those top 5 things while understanding the bottom 3. Take that away and understand and learn the art of contradiction. And it is an art. And we want you to master the art. And here is a master of that art himself, Dr. Jordan Peterson. And as he said here, when you have something to say, silence is a lie, and tyranny feeds on lies. And this is where we see toxic cultures forming in organizations. If people don't speak up, if they allow lies to fester, if they allow untruths to be told, then you are going to see tyranny, you're going to see toxicity, and you're going to see your company decline. And sheep-like passivity and mediocrity will set in with low levels of engagement. So don't do that. Master this art that we're talking about, the art of using your brain to the best way it can be affected. That was the lost art of contradiction. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your patience. Hopefully that's got some of those thought juices stimulating in your brains, like these little 3 individuals here. Kids are the best red team thinkers and critical thinkers in the world. We just see them having to conform as they go through systems. So stop that conformity. Encourage more people to be like your inner child and think differently. If you'd like to learn more or discover more, look at the Thinking Leader podcast or our YouTube channel on Red Team TV, or check us out on LinkedIn or our website for more in-detail engagement. Look forward to hearing from you. And if you have any questions from today, as I said, this is recorded, so feel free to connect. Drop me a line at my email, marcus@redteamthinking.com, or find me on LinkedIn. There's only one Marcus Dimbleby, thanks to my parents naming me with not one name, but 2 different names. And I finally ask, don't be like Bertrand Russell. Most people would rather die than think, and many do. Hopefully now we can show you how critical thinking is easy, is effective, and we can share this with as many people as we can going forward, as you are now part of the Insurgency. So thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of Risk Awareness Week.